Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we really get into the sources you send us, pulling out the most interesting bits.
And today we're looking at a dinosaur from the late Cretaceous, Anserimimus.
Yeah, someone sent over some scientific literature, excerpts from a PDF, actually, all about it.
Right. So our mission, you could say, is to figure out what makes Anserimimus special. You know, what it tells us about its world.
And that name alone, Anserimus goose-mimic, it definitely grabs your attention.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It paints a funny picture.
Which apparently isn't quite accurate, as we'll find out.
Exactly. But this creature, it was living alongside some real giants, like Tarbosaurus.
Must have been a tough neighborhood. So, okay, let's start with that name. Why goose-mimic?
Well, okay, so Anserimimus, it breaks down into Latin and Greek. Anser is Latin for goose.
Right.
And mos is Greek for mimic.
So literally goose-mimic, but you're saying it didn't, look like a goose?
No, probably not. It's more of a paleontological tradition, especially with this group, the ornithomimosaurs.
The bird mimics.
Yeah. They often get names referencing modern birds. Think Strethiomimus.
Ostrich mimic.
Or Gallimimus.
Rooster mimic.
And there's even Pelicanimus, the pelican mimic. It doesn't mean they looked exactly like them.
So it's more like a hint, maybe about their build or something else.
Kind of, maybe a light build, possibly how they moved or fed. It's almost like a shorthand, gives you a general idea.
Okay, that helps. So who found this particular mimic and where?
This one comes from Mongolia, the Bayangkongor province.
Mongolia, okay.
It was found during a joint Soviet-Mongolian expedition back in the late 1970s.
And the naming?
That came later, 1988, by the Mongolian paleontologist Rinchen Barsbold, a really important figure.
He named the genus Anserimimus. Is there just one species?
So far, yes, just the one. Anserimimus planonicus.
Planonicus. Does that mean something specific, too? You mentioned flattened claws earlier.
You got it. Planonicus comes from planus, Latin for flat, and onyx, Greek for claw.
Flat claw. So it's named directly for that feature.
Exactly. Those flattened claws are a key identifier.
Okay, flattened claws on a fast runner? The sources called it lanky.
Yeah, that's the general picture. Slender, two-legged, probably pretty quick.
But how much do we actually know? What did the fossil look like?
Well, that's the thing. The main fossil, the holotype specimen, its number is IGM 100-300.
Right.
It's actually a pretty decent skeleton, articulated, mostly complete, but...
There's always a but.
Yeah, it's missing the skull and the lower jaws.
Ooh, that's significant, really significant for figuring out diet and stuff.
Absolutely. So the early descriptions, they mostly focused on how it was different from other ornithomins they already knew.
Okay.
Then later there was a more detailed study, but it was in an unpublished thesis by Robert Bronowitz back in 2005.
Unpublished, huh? Did it help much?
It did provide more detail. And interestingly, it mentioned a second partial skeleton, ZPL MGDI65.
Oh, so maybe that one had a skull. Or filled in some gaps.
Well, about that second specimen, there was a bit of a twist. Bronowitz himself, in a later publication around 2010, he concluded that while it was definitely related, it was probably different enough to be a separate species. Closely related, but not Anserimimus planicus.
Okay. So we're still mostly relying on that original skeleton, the one without the head.
Pretty much. That's our main reference point for Anserimus itself.
Gotcha. So how big are we talking, size-wise?
The estimates vary a bit. Gregorius Paul, back in 2010, he figured about 3 meters long. That's nearly 10 feet and maybe 50 kilos, 110 pounds.
Okay, fairly like that.
But other studies, looking maybe more at bone proportions, they suggested it could have been quite a bit heavier.
Heavier? How much?
Maybe up to 143 to 170 kilograms. So 317 to 375 pounds.
Whoa, that's a big difference. From 110 pounds to potentially over 300.
It is. Really shows how tricky it is working from incomplete remains. Just for scale, the thigh bone, the femur, on that main specimen is 435 millimeters long.
So a medium-sized dinosaur overall, especially for that time and place.
Yeah, definitely not the biggest thing out there, but not tiny either.
Okay, let's get back to those unique features. You mentioned the flattened claws were key. Tell me more about them.
Right, the claws. They're long, but kind of low profile, quite straight.
Not very curved.
Not really, just a gentle curve near the tip. And the really striking part is the underside. It's almost flat.
Flat underneath. That's where most claws curve, right, for gripping.
Exactly. These aren't like the typical sharp, curved claws you might see on other theropods or even some other ornithomimids.
So what does flat mean? What could they be doing with flat claws? Spreading weight.
That's one possibility. Maybe on softer ground. Or perhaps it suggests they weren't used for, like, powerful grasping or slashing in the same way.
Okay. And you also mentioned powerful forelimbs. That seems unusual for an ornithominid. Weren't they mostly about leg speed?
That's another really distinctive thing about Anserimimus. Compared to others in the family, its arms were surprisingly robust.
How can you tell from the bones?
You look at things like the scapulocoracoid, that's the fused shoulder bone.
Right.
It has these large crests where muscles would attach. Same with the humerus, the upper arm bone, prominent ridges.
Meaning bigger, stronger muscles.
Exactly, indicating strong arm muscles, powerful biceps, for example.
Mm.
And another thing, the hand bones, the metacarpus, they're fused together.
Fused. Why?
That adds strength and rigidity to the hand. Makes it less flexible, but stronger overall.
So, a fast runner, we think, but with these unusually strong arms, fused hand bones, and flat claws. It's kind of a confusing mix.
It is intriguing, isn't it? It definitely sets it apart.
Could the speed have been just for escape, while the arms were for something else entirely?
Yeah.
Like feeding differently.
That's a really good thought.
Yeah.
It's very possible. While many ornithomimids seem built purely for speed, Anserimimus with these stronger arms might have been doing more manipulation, maybe pulling down branches, digging for roots or tubers.
Or even grabbing small animals.
Possibly. Assisting in capturing struggling prey, maybe. And those flat claws, perhaps they were better for pushing or scraping when foraging rather than piercing or gripping.
It definitely suggests it wasn't just doing the same thing as its relatives, a different niche.
Precisely. It points towards a different lifestyle, a different way of getting food.
That makes sense. Okay, there was one more physical thing, that foot structure. The arctometatarsalien foot. Bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, arctometatarsalien. It sounds complex, but the concept is fairly straightforward.
Okay, break it down for us.
So it refers to how the long foot bones, the metatarsals, are arranged.
The ones between the ankle and the toes.
Right. In this kind of foot, the middle metatarsal, the third one, gets pinched or narrowed at the top near the ankle.
Pinched.
Yeah, so for a good part of its upper length, it's kind of squeezed out from the front surface of the foot. It doesn't bear as much direct weight up high.
And what's the point of that?
It's strongly linked to running ability. It tightens up the foot structure, makes it more compact, probably reduces a bit of weight.
Ah, better for speed and stability.
Exactly. It's a feature seen in many dinosaurs thought to be fast runners, so Anserimimus definitely had the feet for speed.
It built for speed, but with those curious arms and claws suggesting more. Okay, let's talk family tree. Where does it fit in?
Well, Barsbold, who named it, put it in the Ornithomimidae family.
Which is part of the larger Ornithomimosauria group, the bird mimics we mentioned.
Correct. And modern studies using cladistics, those methods for figuring out evolutionary relationships based on shared features, they generally agree it belongs firmly within Ornithomimidae.
Does it have any particularly close relatives that we know of?
Several analyses suggest its closest relative might be Gallimimus.
Gallimimus, another famous one. Also from Mongolia, right? From the same formation.
Yes, also found in the Nemec Formation, though maybe different specific localities, so they were contemporaries and potentially close cousins.
Interesting. Is that relationship definite?
Well, studies by Kobayashi and Liu, and later Kobayashi and Barsbold, point strongly that way.
But. I sense another but.
Well, sorting out the exact branching within Ornithomimidae has been tricky. Other studies have come up with slightly different arrangements. It's not always straightforward.
Science in progress, as always. I think the source mentioned a cladogram, like a visual family tree, from a 2011 study.
Yes, from Zhu and colleagues. That particular analysis does place Anserimimus as a close relative to Gallimimus.
Okay.
Then you see other groups branching off, like Quipalong, and then another branch with familiar names like Struthiomimus and Ornithomimus.
So it helps visualize where it sits in the grand scheme of bird mimics.
Exactly. It gives us a proposed map of their relationships.
Okay, so we have a better idea of its family ties. But it circles back to that main puzzle. Those arms, those claws, what was it doing?
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The sources are clear that the function isn't known for sure. It's still debated.
But the unique combination must mean something, right?
Oh, absolutely. It strongly suggests Anserimimus had a different diet or maybe a different food-gathering strategy compared to the other ornithomids that lacked those specific features.
So definitely not mimicking a goose's eating habits.
Almost certainly not. And, this ties into the bigger picture of ornithomid diets generally.
Right, because they came from carnivores. But many might have become omnivores or herbivores.
Exactly. That idea's been around for a long time, actually, since Osborn mentioned it way back in 1917.
Wow, over a century ago.
Yeah. But without the skull for Anserimimus, it's really tough to say anything definitive about its diet from, like, teeth or beak shape.
Another missing piece. Okay, let's paint a picture of its world. The Nemec Formation in Mongolia. What was it, like 70 million years ago?
Think rivers. Lots of them. The Nemeg is interpreted as basically ancient alluvial plains, flat areas built up by river sediments, meandering rivers crossing the landscape.
So river plains, was it dry, lush?
The evidence suggests it was reasonably well-watered. The specific time period is the early Maastrichtian stage, late Cretaceous, around 70 million years ago.
And who else was around? We mentioned Tarbosaurus.
Oh, it's an incredible ecosystem, really diverse. You had Tarbosaurus, the huge apex predator, like a T-Rex relative.
Okay.
And the very strange giant Dinocaris with its massive arms.
Yes, another oddball from Nemeg.
Definitely. Then lots of smaller theropods, dromaeosaurs, the raptors, oviraptorosaurs, troodontids, even early birds flitting about.
Wow. What about plant eaters?
Plenty of those too. Big hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs like Barsboldia and Saurolophus.
Got it.
Armored ankylosaurs like Tarchia, giant titanosaurian sauropods, those long necks, and the thick-skulled pachycephalosaurs.
That is quite a list. It sounds absolutely packed with dinosaurs.
It really was. The rocks themselves, the facies, they suggest different environments within that plain river channels, muddy floodplains, maybe shallow lakes or swamps.
So a varied landscape within the bigger picture.
Yeah, and all the evidence points to it being a really rich habitat. Lots of plants, lots of water, able to support all these massive animals.
Okay, so let's try and sum up Anserimimus. We've got this dinosaur, goose-mimic, by name but not nature.
Right. Known for its weirdly flat claws and unusually strong arms, especially for an ornithomin.
Found in late Cretaceous Mongolia, living in this incredibly diverse Nemec Formation ecosystem.
Alongside giants like Tarbosaurus and Dinocaris, and possibly closely related to Glabimus.
Placed within the Ornithomimidae family, seems pretty solid.
Yep. But that central mystery remains.
What were those arms and claws for?
Exactly. What specific food source was it exploiting? How did it fit into that complex food web? We just don't know for sure.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? When you place Anserimimus with its unique features back into that crowded environment, what was its specific job? Its niche?
What was it eating that maybe Glabimus wasn't? How did those strong arms actually function day to day?
And you wonder, what clues are still buried out there? Maybe a skull. Or trackways, something that could finally unlock its lifestyle.
It's a fantastic example of how even one incomplete skeleton can spark so much scientific investigation, and how much more there is still to learn about these incredible animals and their lost worlds.